They told me I was rejected like it was some unavoidable tragedy, like bad weather you can't fight. I still remember the way the room felt heavy when those words landed on me. My body was there, sitting on the bed, but my mind just froze. Years of effort collapsed into a single sentence, and suddenly I was supposed to accept it quietly. No questions, no proof, just trust. I stared at the wall, numb, trying to understand how something I worked toward my entire life could end without even a fight. And the worst part wasn't the rejection itself, it was how easily they expected me to swallow it. At that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just felt empty. The kind of empty that hits when you realize the world doesn't pause for your pain. Inside my head, everything was spinning. I kept thinking maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe all those nights, all those sacrifices, all that pressure I put on myself still didn't make me worthy. I remember lying back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking this must be what failure feels like, complete silence inside your chest. What I didn't know then, and this is important, was that I wasn't rejected by a university. I was rejected by the people who were supposed to protect my future. Growing up, I was that kid who took school seriously way too early. While others were playing, I was already obsessed with grades. Not because I loved studying, but because somewhere deep inside I knew education was my exit plan. For me, academics weren't about trophies or praise, they were about escape. Escape from limitations, escape from control, escape from a future where I would be told what I could and couldn't become. I carried responsibilities on my shoulders before I even understood what responsibility meant. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it twice as hard, so I did. Honors classes, extra projects, competitions, Olympiads. Whatever opportunity came my way, I grabbed it. Not because someone pushed me, but because no one else was going to save me. At home, my ambition was never celebrated. It was tolerated. I was called too serious, too dramatic, too intense. Every time I talked about big universities or scholarships, the reactions were always the same. People would smile politely and tell me not to think so high. They remind me of our background, our circumstances, our limits. They'd say things like, it's better to stay realistic, better to stay close, better to not dream too loud. And every time they said that, something inside me hardened. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd study alone. YouTube lectures playing on low volume, free resources, online forums, notes scribbled everywhere. I built my application piece by piece, without guidance, without mentors, without connections. I taught myself how scholarships worked. I learned how admissions essays were written. I researched deadlines, requirements, and strategies like my life depended on it, because it did. A full-ride scholarship wasn't just financial help for me, it was freedom. It meant no one could control where I went. It meant no one could say, we can't afford it. It meant I could finally breathe without asking permission. Every form I filled out, every essay I rewrote, every exam I retook was driven by that one idea. This is my way out. But no matter how hard I worked, there was always this quiet resistance at home. Not loud arguments, not direct opposition, just subtle discouragement, small comments, shrugs, doubt disguised as concern. The kind that slowly makes you question yourself. The kind that says, maybe they're right, maybe I'm asking for too much. Application season was brutal. Constant refreshing of email inboxes, checking portals obsessively, waking up at night just to see if anything updated. My heart lived in a constant state of anxiety. Every notification made my stomach drop. Every silence felt like rejection. Still, I stayed hopeful. I told myself that even if it didn't work out, at least I tried. Then came the day they told me the decision had arrived. The words felt rehearsed, like they had practiced them before saying them out loud. They said the university had rejected me. They said it gently, almost apologetically, like they were doing me a favor by breaking the news softly. No email shown, no letter handed over, just their version of the truth. In that moment, all I felt was shame. Shame for dreaming too big, shame for believing I could break out, shame for thinking I deserved more. I smiled and nodded like I always did. I said I'd manage. I said it was okay, because that's what I was trained to do, accept disappointment quietly so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the sacrifices that now felt pointless. I thought about the people who told me not to aim so high and how right they must feel now. I thought about how easily a single word, rejected, could rewrite the story of my life. And I didn't know yet that the real story hadn't even started, because months later, when I would discover the truth, I'd realize something that would change me forever. That the rejection I accepted so gracefully never actually came from the university. It came from inside my own home. And once that realization hit, there was no going back to silence. After they told me I was rejected, life didn't stop. It just quietly shifted into a smaller version of itself. Plans shrank, expectations lowered. Everyone around me moved on faster than I did, like this outcome made sense to them. I was suddenly being talked to like someone who had reached their limit. Conversations about the future now came with conditions, local options, practical choices, staying close, adjusting dreams. It felt like my ambition had officially become an inconvenience. I tried to act normal, I really did. I told myself, maybe this is how adulthood works. You dream big, reality slaps you, and then you settle. But inside, something felt unfinished. The rejection didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It felt vague, incomplete, like a story with missing pages. I realized I never actually saw proof. No official email, no portal screenshot, no letter, just someone else's words deciding my fate. Weeks turned into months. I tried focusing on backup plans, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time someone said, "At least you tried," something inside me flinched. Because trying didn't feel like failure. This felt like erasure. Still, I stayed quiet. Years of being the responsible one had trained me not to question authority, especially inside my own house. Then, one random afternoon, everything cracked open. I was cleaning out old emails on a shared device, trying to free up storage, not looking for anything specific, just scrolling, deleting junk, half distracted. And that's when I saw it. A subject line that made my breath stop. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, it was formal, calm, professional, the kind of email you don't forget once you see it. My hands froze over the mouse. I opened it slowly, almost afraid my eyes were lying to me. It was from the university. At first, my brain couldn't process the words. I read the same lines again and again. Something about an offer, something about congratulations, something about a scholarship package. My chest tightened so hard it felt painful. I kept scrolling, my heart pounding louder with every sentence. Tuition coverage, housing, additional support, deadlines, acceptance confirmation. All of it was there, clear, undeniable, real. And right at the bottom, a small line changed everything. It said the offer had expired due to no response. I remember feeling dizzy, like the room tilted, like the air disappeared. My fingers were sweaty, my vision blurred, and my heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. My brain kept repeating the same thought over and over again. This can't be real. This has to be a mistake. But it wasn't. I logged into the admissions portal with shaking hands. The page loaded slowly, each second stretching like torture. When it finally appeared, the status was right there. Offer sent, offer viewed, response pending, offer expired. According to the system, the university had done everything right. They had sent reminders, they had waited, they had assumed I wasn't interested. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling something darker than sadness rise inside me. Confusion turned into suspicion, suspicion turned into fear, because one question wouldn't leave my head. If this was sent, then who saw it? I contacted the admissions office, still hoping there was some misunderstanding, maybe a glitch, maybe a system error, maybe a wrong email address. But the response I received was calm, factual, and devastating. According to their records, the scholarship package had been delivered successfully. It had been opened multiple times, reminder emails had been sent, but no signed acceptance ever came back. That's when the truth stopped being abstract. The email hadn't disappeared, it hadn't gone to spam, it hadn't been lost, it had been seen and ignored. I felt sick, not because I lost the scholarship, but because I realized someone else had made that decision for me. Someone had looked at my future and decided it wasn't happening. Someone had watched the deadline pass in silence while I mourned a rejection that never existed. I started digging deeper. Old devices, archived emails, deleted folders, printed documents stuffed into drawers. And piece by piece the evidence surfaced. Offer letters, reminder notices, deadline warnings, everything neatly dated, everything real, everything hidden from me. The more I uncovered, the heavier it got. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a choice, a deliberate one. The offer wasn't just unopened, it had been accessed, reviewed, and then quietly buried. And suddenly, all those conversations from before made sense. All the discouragement, all the insistence on staying close, all the comments about practicality and family needs. I replayed every memory with new clarity. Every time my ambition was dismissed, every time my dreams were downsized, every time I was told to be realistic. This wasn't protection, this was control. Control disguised as concern, fear disguised as guidance. The most painful realization wasn't that I lost a full-ride scholarship. It was that the people who told me I was rejected had watched me grieve something they knew I was never denied. They watched me accept defeat with grace. They watched me shrink my future. And they said nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing between anger and heartbreak. I felt betrayed in a way I didn't know how to name. This wasn't a stranger sabotaging me. This was family, the same people who said they wanted what was best for me. By morning, something inside me had changed. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't confused. I was clear, very clear. What happened to me wasn't just unfair, it was wrong, and silence was no longer an option. Because now that I knew the truth, I had a choice. I could swallow it like I swallowed everything else, or I could do something different, something smarter, something that didn't rely on screaming or emotional explosions. Something that relied on facts. And that's when I started planning. Once the truth settled in, I didn't explode the way people expect betrayal to look like. There was no screaming, no confrontation, no emotional breakdown in front of anyone. Instead, something colder took over.
a kind of clarity I had never felt before. I realized that reacting emotionally would only make me look unstable, dramatic, or ungrateful, and I refused to let my pain be used against me. If I was going to do this, I would do it smartly. The first thing I did was slow everything down. I stopped asking questions out loud, I stopped reacting, I stopped giving any sign that I knew the truth. On the outside, I stayed exactly the same. Quiet, composed, still the rejected one who was figuring things out. On the inside, though, I was
Documenting everything, every date, every email, every reminder that proved this wasn't an accident, but a decision. I went back to the university portal and took screenshots of every page that mentioned the scholarship offer, the dates, the timestamps, the status showing that the offer had been viewed but never accepted. I saved copies in multiple places, just in case. I archived emails from admissions explaining that reminders had been sent and that no response was ever received. I made sure nothing could be deleted again. Then I created a timeline, a clean, factual sequence of events that couldn't be argued with. The day the offer was sent, the day's reminders went out, the exact window when the acceptance deadline was active. And right next to that, I marked the day my parents sat on my bed and told me I was rejected. Seeing it written down like that made my stomach turn. The overlap was undeniable. Next, I focused on how the emails were accessed, shared devices, shared accounts, household systems that I had trusted without question. I didn't need to accuse anyone yet. I just needed proof that I wasn't the one who failed to respond, that I never even had the chance. Every recovered file, every access log, every opened message quietly strengthened my position. But I wasn't just building a case against them, I was building a future without them. I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let this betrayal freeze my life. So while I gathered evidence, I also started working on my escape again, quietly, carefully, without announcing anything. I researched transfer options, late admissions, gap year reapplications, alternate scholarships, anything that could get me back on track. I updated my resume. I looked into remote work and freelance opportunities. I calculated how much I'd need to support myself without relying on anyone who thought controlling my future was their right. It wasn't easy. Some nights, exhaustion hit hard. There were moments I wanted to confront them immediately, to ask why, to demand answers. But I reminded myself that timing was everything. This wasn't about revenge fueled by anger. This was about reclaiming power. The more I prepared, the more I understood what had really happened. This wasn't jealousy. It wasn't cruelty for the sake of cruelty. It was fear. Fear of distance. Fear of losing control. Fear of what would happen if I succeeded without them. My independence threatened the structure they were comfortable with, so they quietly eliminated it and called it protection. That realization hurt more than the lost scholarship. I knew I needed to expose the truth in a way that couldn't be brushed aside or minimized. A private confrontation would turn into denial, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, tears, justifications. I'd be told I misunderstood, that they did what they thought was best, that I should be grateful. I refused to let that happen. So I decided the truth would come out publicly, but not loudly, calmly, factually, in a setting where witnesses would make it impossible to rewrite history. I waited. Family gatherings came and went. Comments about my future continued, pity disguised as advice. People telling me things happen for a reason. I smiled through all of it, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew what was coming. In the meantime, I secured my next step, a different university, partial aid, a plan that didn't require permission. It wasn't the full ride I lost, but it was enough to prove something important. They hadn't destroyed my future, they had delayed it, and delay could be recovered.
Control could not. Once everything was in place, I chose the moment. A gathering where relatives, family friends, and people who respected my parents would be present. A place where their image mattered, where their version of being supportive, sacrificial, and realistic had an audience. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted revenge that whispered and still shook the room. By the time that day arrived, I wasn't angry anymore. I was steady, prepared, detached in the way you become when you've already grieved what you lost and accepted who caused it. I had my evidence organized, my timeline memorized, my future secured. All that was left was execution. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't sound like an accusation, it would sound like a correction. A correction they wouldn't be able to undo. Because once facts are spoken out loud in front of witnesses, they don't disappear, they don't get rewritten, they don't get buried like an email in a deleted folder. By the time the gathering happened, I wasn't nervous. That surprised even me. Months earlier, the thought of being in that room would have made my chest tighten. But now I felt detached, like I'd already stepped into a different version of my life. Everyone there still saw me as the one who was rejected, the one who aimed too high and came back empty-handed. That assumption was the quiet foundation the entire moment would rest on. The conversation drifted the way it always did. People talked about sacrifices, about how competitive education had become, about how sometimes things just don't work out. I noticed how easily my story was being told for me, reshaped into something that made others comfortable. I let it happen for a while. I needed the contrast. I needed the truth to land hard. When I finally spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I simply corrected the story. I explained that I had never actually been rejected, that the university had sent a full-ride scholarship.
Offer covering tuition, housing, and additional support. I shared how the offer expired not because I declined it, but because no response was ever sent on my behalf. I watched the room shift as people processed that. Confusion came first, then disbelief, then silence. I laid out the facts slowly. The dates the emails were sent, the reminders that followed, the portal status showing the offer was opened but never accepted. I clarified that according to the university, the communication was successfully delivered and accessed. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I didn't have to. The truth pointed exactly where it needed to. What hit hardest wasn't the shock on people's faces. It was the questions that followed. Questions that couldn't be controlled or redirected. Questions about who saw the offer, why no one responded, how a decision like that could be made without me knowing. The kind of questions that expose cracks no explanation can patch. I stayed composed through all of it. That was the real payback. I didn't look bitter, I didn't look unstable. I looked informed, grounded, certain, and that made it impossible to dismiss what I was saying as emotional exaggeration. The image they had carefully built began to unravel without me lifting a finger. The narrative of being protective, realistic, and supportive couldn't survive documented facts. Silence replaced excuses. Discomfort replaced authority. I could feel the power shift without needing to see it. Later that night, when the house finally went quiet, the confrontation happened. This time there was no audience, no performance, just the truth sitting between us, heavy and unavoidable. I said everything I had held in for months, not angrily but clearly. I explained that this wasn't about one opportunity, it was about control, about making a life-altering decision for me without consent and calling it care. I acknowledged their reasons without accepting them. Fear of distance, fear of instability, fear of losing control. None of it justified what they did. None of it gave them the right to erase my choice. I made it clear that what hurt the most wasn't losing the scholarship, but realizing my future was considered negotiable. I told them I had already secured another path forward, another university, financial aid, a plan that didn't depend on their approval, that I had learned how to build something on my own, even after everything that was taken from me. I made it clear that from that moment on, decisions about my education and life would no longer be shared or filtered through anyone else. The room felt smaller after that, not because I was trapped, but because the control they once had no longer existed. They couldn't undo what they had done, and they couldn't claim credit for what I was about to do next. Walking away from that conversation, I felt lighter. Not healed, healing takes time, but free. Free from needing validation, free from explaining myself, free from believing that obedience was the same thing as love. This experience taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't told by strangers. They're told by people who insist they know what's best for you. Sometimes protection is just fear wearing a softer name. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is verify your own story. To anyone watching this who feels like their dreams are being quietly downsized by people they trust, check your facts, ask questions, protect your access. Your future deserves transparency, not permission. Family doesn't get to decide your limits, and love doesn't require silence. They tried to close one university gate for me, but what they underestimated was this: I don't wake up from rejection. I wake up from deception. And once I see the truth, no one ever gets the password to my future again.